Hey, I'm Josh, and this is the Camera Project. In this review, we're going to be taking a look at the Panasonic Lumix G9, the new flagship stills camera from Panasonic. Now, in the past, they only had one flagship camera, and that was the GH5. But now they're calling that the flagship hybrid model, while this, the G9, is the flagship stills camera. In this review, we're going to be in Midtown Manhattan, taking the G9 through its paces. So being the new flagship from Panasonic, this of course has all the bells and whistles we've previously seen in Panasonic flagship cameras, like the 4K and 6K photo mode and the post-focus, which are fantastic features and really take advantage of the 4K and 6K video these cameras are capable of. The camera has a 20.3 megapixel micro four thirds image sensor, but via a new trick, high-res mode, it can actually make an 80 megapixel RAW. What it does is it moves the sensor around like it does for image stabilization and actually combines multiple images to get that 80 megapixel resolution. Now, we've seen this before from Olympus cameras and Sony cameras, but for its first implementation of it, the Panasonic does a really nice job and does it right in camera. The camera also features dual IS2, which will get you 6.5 stops of image stabilization. On the body itself, it's a really rugged, weatherproof design with a really comfortable grip, which is even bigger and more comfortable than the GH5. It has 5 function buttons on the camera with an additional 4 if you use the command dial as function buttons, which you can now do because of the focus joystick on the back of the camera, which lets you move your focus point as well as navigate menus. Now, you can also use the variable angle touch LCD screen. And just like other Panasonic cameras, you can navigate not only your focus point, but your menus as well. I find this menu system is the best use of the touch interface on any camera manufacturer. The camera features dual UHS Type 2 memory card slots, a USB 3 port that allows for charging, and the new top LCD screen, which, while a DSLR mainstay, is unique on micro four thirds bodies. For the video shooters, there is a microphone, headphone, and full-size HDMI port. And while this is being marketed as a stills camera, it's an extremely capable video camera as well, with the video going up to 4K at 60 frames per second and 180 frames per second at 1080. Let's take it around the city and see how it does in all these categories. If you've been following the specs of the G9, some of the biggest standout features on the camera are in the area of continuous frame rates and autofocus shooting. The G9 is capable of up to 60 frames per second full-size RAW shooting. It accomplishes this using the electronic shutter with the autofocus single mode. If you need continuous autofocus, you can still shoot at 20 frames per second with the electronic shutter. If you want to use the mechanical shutter, you can shoot at 12 frames per second in autofocus single mode and 9 frames per second in autofocus continuous mode. I decided to take the G9 to Bryant Park's Winter Village to check out its performance at an insanely crowded ice rink. Please keep in mind, it was really hard to follow a single subject in the rink, so yeah, operator error is a definite possibility. Okay, so that wraps up our autofocus test here in Bryant Park. I think that I found that the custom multi-setting was my best bet, just because the tracking and the face tracking was really hard to do with people constantly weaving in and out. Now obviously if it was someone running or track or something like that, it might be different, but here I just found that the custom multi seemed to be giving me the best results. I should also note that I'm shooting this with the 12-60 f2.8 to f4 Leica, and I'm doing a shoot of myself, so we'll see how me holding this at arm's length does in terms of being stable, being in focus. Of course, it will have the dual image stabilization in video. And speaking of the image stabilization on this camera, let's take a look at our tests. Overall, I'd say I was extremely impressed with the image stabilization on this camera. It may have been the best I've ever used, only having the Olympus E-M1 Mark II as its competition. Using the 12-60 Leica lens with electronic first curtain shutter and a 1-second delay, at the 12mm end of the lens I had sharp results up to 2.5 seconds handheld. At 3.2 seconds it was a bit blurry, but then amazingly I got sharp results at 4 seconds. Then while 5 and 6 seconds were understandably a bit blurry, I got something at 8 seconds that, while not totally sharp, was mind-blowing in how little blur there was. At the 60mm end, however, it was a total horror. No, just kidding. It was really equally impressive. I had sharp results up to 1 second, then had a few blurry shots, but magically at 3.2 seconds, it was pretty damn sharp. Certainly more than respectable results here. Now, for those of you interested in video, we decided to check out the video image stabilization as well. Alright, so now we're going to do some video stabilization tests on the G9. Now obviously this isn't primarily a video camera, that's obviously the GH5 or GH5S, but it's certainly an extremely competent video camera, so someone who's primarily into stills and just wants to do some casual video is still going to want to know how the video performance of this camera is. We're going to do some image stabilization tests against the Olympus E-M5 Mark II, which is obviously a 2-year-old camera, but it still has pretty good image stabilization. Alright, so I have my crazy rig here with the Olympus E-M5 Mark II and the Panasonic G9. Now both have the camera-based stabilization on, and both are using unstabilized lenses, the Olympus 17mm, the Panasonic Leica 15mm. I'm going to start out by just doing a brief handheld test, do a little bit of panning. Alright, so now I'm going to do a test where the Olympus's stabilization is set to off, just so you can see how big of a difference the stabilization makes having it on. Now obviously it's not apples to apples, but it's going to give you a rough idea of what a micro four thirds sensor would look like without the stabilization. Alright, so this test is going to be the Olympus and the Panasonic both just have their sensor-based stabilization on, none of the digital stabilization on top of it. Neither lens has stabilization either. Let's see how that goes. Okay, so now I'm doing a test with the Olympus's digital and sensor-based stabilization and the Panasonic's digital and sensor-based stabilization. Neither lenses are stabilized, so we're just going to see what that looks like with the digital and the sensor doing the stabilization. Okay, so for this test I have the 12-60mm Leica lens on here, and that will give me a stabilized lens in addition to the sensor and digital based stabilization. Now for the Olympus I opted for just the sensor based stabilization because I don't usually love what the digital does on this camera, even though it can take out some of those little wobblies. I find it creates some artifacts. So that's how I'm going to test it. We'll see how it all looks. Finishing up the video section of this camera, I do have a few gripes that, while they aren't deal breakers, would be easy enough firmware fixes. The GH5 has the fantastic feature where you can select shutter angle instead of shutter speeds, so even when you change frame rates, you don't have to think about updating your settings. I know this is a bit more of a pro feature, but it's just firmware. Also, when you're shooting in the 180 frame per second mode in 1080, there seems to be no way of changing your settings like aperture, ISO, and shutter speed, unless I totally missed something there. If they're worried about people messing up the settings, allow for an advanced mode for those users who know what they're doing. Going back to still photography, the G9 continues Panasonic's implementation of the minimum shutter speed in auto ISO that we first got with the GH5. If you watch any of our reviews, you know this is my thing, and I don't get any camera manufacturer that still doesn't include this feature. The implementation is fairly basic, but does the trick, especially with the addition of the My menu for quick access to this feature. My only gripe would be that they've limited the selection of your ISO range to full stop increments. Even if you've selected the preference in the menus to use third stop increments for ISO, I know this sounds like not such a big deal, but the difference between 6400 and 12800 is kind of a huge leap, and I'd be more comfortable with something like 8000 for my street photography. It would also be great if they took a page from Fuji's book and allowed for a few auto ISO presets, so you can have presets, let's say, for street photography, one for portraits, and another for still life. This camera is on the large end for micro four thirds bodies, and while I think it's perfect in the hands of a wildlife shooter who's using long lenses, or even a working photographer holding the camera for hours at a time, I find that for my needs I would still prefer a smaller body more in line with the GX9 or Olympus E-M5 II, but still retaining most of the flagship performance of this body. One more small gripe, the shutter button. While I mainly got used to it over the course of my time with the camera, damn, that thing is sensitive. I would certainly prefer it a little less so next time. Gripes aside, I can say that this camera truly lives up to the flagship status. It performs admirably in almost every category and shines in the areas of autofocus, image stabilization, customization, and comfort. A small personal plug before I sign off. If you're interested in doing a workshop in street photography, check out my website joshweiss.photography for more information. If you're interested in more photos from this camera, including ISO tests, please check out our website, thecameraproj.com. Subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments the type of information you would like to see. Thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe. No, really, subscribe.